Hello, everyone. Waiting for this to start. Okay, just close out some things to make my video a little bit better quality. Close, close, close. All right, here we are. Happy Friday evening, Twin Cities community. This is Dr. Mel here. And for those of you who are new to our community, welcome. And if you haven't ever seen me go live, welcome. Oftentimes, I go live on Mondays. We do a Mindfulness Monday. Since our hours have shifted, I may have to shift that when it comes to going live with y'all. Not saying I'm going to show up every single Friday evening, but I felt called to come on here given the time that we're in the culture and everything we're seeing happening when it comes to cycles and fertility and abortion and all of this stuff that's happening. And I want you to know that regardless of where you stand in that and what your beliefs are, that's not the purpose of this live video. The purpose of this live video is to really help you if you are someone who experiences what we call in the culture a menstrual cycle. This live is to help you tap into that in a more empowered and authentic way, no matter, again, where you're at. Because here's the thing, when I talk about menstrual cycles, some people who maybe are on some sort of birth control, if they don't have a uterus because they've had a surgery, it doesn't necessarily matter. You still have cycles and you still have rhythms. And I'm going to talk about that in this live video and why it's important to tap into that. This is something that Jess and Ashley and myself are going to be talking about at our one-day immersion, our Magic of the Moon immersion this June, which I'll talk about at the end of this video. When I was growing up, I did not really experience any form of empowered education when it came to talking about what it's like to have a cycle and what it's like to be a woman who has a period and who has cycles outside of having a period. And a lot of people that I've talked to over the last couple months have said the same thing, that the education was sparse. There was no education. It was from a very fearful place. It was very fragmented. It was very medicalized and it was very pathologically oriented. So that's why I felt really called to come on here tonight, given everything that's going on, and talk about how do we actually honor our bodies and how do we actually tap into the power of our bodies and start to do some rewiring and potentially some unprogramming of what we've been told. Because what's out there in the culture and the mainstream media and social media and mainstream marketing is a very different message. When we think about menstrual cycles, for example, a lot of people think of the time of the cycle when you're actually bleeding or when maybe you feel more emotional or you feel more sensitive. And there's a reason for all of that. And no part of your cycle is wrong and no part of your cycle is bad or worse than any other part of your cycle. You have 4 different phases. So being clear on that, your cycle goes beyond just the time that you bleed, which we call menses. And if you are someone who identifies as female, and even if you don't have necessarily the anatomical parts, your body still has a remembrance and a resonance of having that rhythm in your life. So it's not like it just goes away. And each part of your cycle, the 4 different phases, you experience different emotions, different hormonal cascades. You experience different thought processes and even different energetic states. So for me growing up, I basically learned, well, this is what happens at this time of the month, that 3 to 7 day window. And then beyond that, the rest is kind of in the dark or really unknown. And frankly, that's just not one fair to keep our education as a female, as someone who identifies as a woman, to keep it so boxed in when you are a multidimensional being and you have multi phases and you have different experiences and not to label them as wrong. I see so many people come into my office and share, I've been told that I'm crazy. I've been told I can't heal from this. I've been told that I am broken and it's never going to get any better. So I just have to take this thing for the rest of my life. And even that isn't working. And for myself, that's what I dealt with when I started to get into adolescent years. I started to deal with really severe menstrual issues. And I mean, I've shared a lot of my personal story on social media platforms. Side note, if you're viewing this live and you're commenting, I can't necessarily. Oh, Gerard, hi. Good. Okay, if I scroll, I can see it. This whole like going live in groups is very different. That's why our team is starting to build out an academy and put content other places because Facebook is its own thing. Anyway, so when I was growing up, and I started to get into my adolescent years and I started having menses, I started to experience really, really, really bad cramps, really bad knife like pain. My cycles were very, very heavy, and I just felt super emotional during that time of the month to the point where I felt like a different person. And while we go through different energetic states during our cycle, which, by the way, if you identify as male, this will probably really serve you if you are in a heterosexual relationship or you engage with women. I promise this is going to serve you because you're going to understand like the science and the spirituality of all of this and be able to relate and not deem someone during that time of the month, for example, as crazy because you're going to understand, oh, the hormones are different, the energy is different. Literally, you're passing an egg through your body, and that egg has different energetic coding and different energies based on what your mother went through as well as your grandmother. So when your grandmother has had your mother in the womb and you were technically being formed in your mother's eggs, which is part of you. So yes, what our grandmother went through during their lifetime, there could be a resonance in your DNA and your physiology and your biology. So just know that. I'm not going to get super meta in this live, but that will be stuff we're talking about in June. So for me, the way this manifested was I was dealing with all this stuff and I would pop the Midol, I would rub Tiger Balm on my belly, and I just dealt with it, right? Because I didn't know any other strategy. I didn't know how food related to my cycle. I didn't know how actually slowing down during my cycle benefited me. And I just pushed through, and I just dealt with it. And all those strategies really didn't work for me. Sometimes they work for people, sometimes they don't. So I go to the doctor and she said, well, just take birth control and you'll be fine. And I took the birth control for a while and I noticed some things shift because anytime you do something different, your brain releases serotonin and dopamine, which can support an initial response in your physiology. And then eventually that strategy also doesn't work anymore. So I'm taking this birth control probably for like 6 or 7 years, and it's not working. Like I'm bleeding more, I'm getting more emotional, I'm gaining excessive weight, and I just know something is off in my body. Side note, I share my personal story around hormonal birth control, not to say that medicine is bad and you can't do that. It's just my personal experience. And we also have to remember that if the physiology is doing something that is something to be listened to, taking a pill can like be an initial strategy. Like if you really feel like you're in dire straits and that's absolutely what you need to do, awesome. I'm not here to bash the medical system. I'm not here to do that, okay? And we have to remember that that's like playing whack-a-mole. So if you're having symptomatology and you're having things show up in your body that you intuitively know is off, we have to explore that from a different perspective. So while taking something may serve your initial like pain complaints and symptomatology, the body always has a reason for doing things. And so we got to get to the source and we got to understand, why is the body doing this? Now, it wasn't until I started my own self-healing journey that I really discovered, oh, that's why my body was creating all these things based on choices I made, based on experiences that happened to me. And I'm very grateful that at some point I decided to listen to my body rather than ignore it and close off my ears to it. When I started to heal myself and heal my cycles, I really started to self-educate. So I took classes, I read a bunch of books, I studied to really understand what is it about my body that I can learn more of to feel empowered? And how can I be more empowered in that experience and actually understand this thing called a cycle? In spiritual terms, they call it a moon. So when we menstruate, they call it a moon. So some people will say, I'm on my moon, because just like there's phases of the moon, we as women who have a cycle also have a moon phase. And we also go through phases, and we're sometimes bright and shiny in the sky. And then other times we just want to be like the new moon and go inward a little bit and not be bright and shiny. And there's a reason for that, and I'm going to get into that a little bit on this live, and that will also be what we go really deep into at our Magic of the Moon workshop on June 25th, which I will post in the comments after this. If you're curious to attend, I'll post in the comments a link so you can join us, and it's going to be awesome. So the first phase, when someone is initiated into menses, the first phase of the cycle, which is generally day 1 to day 7, or I guess you could call, it depends on how you label it. So day 1 to day 7 is what we would call the menstruation phase. So the first day of bleed, when your body actually, the egg is coming down the vaginal canal, and we actually have a menstrual cycle, that's menses. So we label that as day 1. And generally, on average, it's normal, which, by the way, just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal physiology. So I want to preface that. Day 1 to day 7 is generally when we are bleeding. And at that point of the cycle, our hormones are generally lower and our energy generally goes inward. And because our hormones like estrogen and progesterone are lower, we generally don't feel as energized. And it's important to rest at this time. And we're going to be going into deeper strategies of how to support that phase. But in this time, if you identify as a woman and you have a cycle, it's very important to listen to your body. You might feel like you want to sleep more. You might feel like you want to go inward and you're not as expressive and outgoing. And you might feel like you need to take a pause on your projects because you don't have as much energy to contribute. And that's okay. That's normal. Because you're literally bleeding and you're literally releasing an egg, which does take a lot of energy for the body. So sometimes digestion may be different because it takes energy from the uterus to the ovaries, really to the ovaries through the fallopian tube, through the uterus, through the vaginal canal to actually pass that egg because it wasn't fertilized. And so that requires more energy. And so naturally you may feel like you need some downtime. This is a really powerful time to go inward. And this is what in Wild Power, for example, that book, I highly recommend that book. They call this the winter. Because in winter, we just want to go inward and be warm and nourished. So it's a really powerful time to nourish yourself and care for yourself and really learn what it's like to go into the winter of your own being. After about day 7, we start to ramp up our hormones again. So this is called the follicular phase. This is what you could call spring. So our energy is ramping up. We might feel like we want to go into more planning and strategic mode. And we're not necessarily super out there in the world yet, but it's like the buds are coming through. So our menses has passed. Our endothelium of our vaginal canal is starting to blossom again. So literally the cells are starting to come back online because, by the way, you bleed because as the egg comes down the vaginal canal, it's literally breaking apart the blood vessels and the cells, and that's why you bleed, because the egg is kind of creating a new path, and it's almost it's kind of like spring cleaning, right? So that's why after winter comes spring. And in your body, you may feel like you want to plan and strategize, and you may actually feel like you want to kind of reorganize stuff. Not that you're putting your project out in the world or showing your house, but you're in that kind of strategy mode. You're in more planning mode. You're writing the book, but you haven't published it yet. That's the way I like to describe it. Or you're planning the talk, but you haven't gone on stage yet. After the follicular phase, we enter ovulation. And this is where the new egg is most optimal for fertilization. So it's come out of the ovary and it's at the ideal position. Again, this is if your cycle is normal, if your hormones are balanced, if your nervous system is functioning well. This is what this normally looks like. Now, if any of your foundational factors of your health and well-being in a holistic fashion are off, it may manifest as dysregulated cycles. So that's something to pay attention to. And that was what was happening for me. My libido was super low. And again, we'll talk about this more in the workshop, but just to give a preview. Ovulation. So ovulation is where you are ready to go. So for me, I'm ovulating right now, which is why I'm doing a live video on a Friday night at 8 o'clock and I have energy. If I'm menstruating, there's no way in hell I'd be on here right now. Now, in the past, I probably would have pushed through and driven through, and I wasn't honoring my rhythms. So, in menstruation, you can think of this as the summer phase. So, this is where you're out in the world, you're bright and shiny, it's the full moon, and it's summer, and you're ready to, like, you know, you're ovulating. And in your physiology, that is a moment in time where you are more fertile. And so, your body could produce a baby at this time and implant and essentially create that initial. I'm losing my train of thought, but essentially the egg becomes fertilized and a baby can be born at this time. Not born, but initial genesis of that child. So you will look fuller in your body. It's very common in ovulation to be fuller in your hips, to hold a little bit more water. You might feel like you have more energy at the gym because biology, the opposite, or I guess if you to another human being look as though you could procreate, you're going to look more full as though you could carry a child. That's just normal physiology, normal biology. So your body may look more voluptuous because you're fertile. So I share this because it's important to not judge your bodily changes through your cycles. And this is something that I did quite a bit. I was like, oh, my body's so bloated. I would judge myself. And I'm sure a lot of people have been there. And there's a reason why your body's doing that. And it's for biology and it's for physiology. So ovulation, you're going to have a lot more energy to do stuff. So this is where you're like publishing the book, you're on stage talking, you're super like solution oriented. Generally at this time, I'm not as introspective, but I'm very external. So I can be with people longer. I'm less like wanting to be socially inward and I want to like go out and like party, right? I might stay up a little later, that type of thing. Because I have more energy. So I'll pause on that. Gerard says, Nikki Child's my friend. You're tagging Nikki. Yay. Thank you, Gerard. Yeah, gentlemen can have compassion for what ladies experience. Yes, absolutely. I love that. Love, love, love. Thank you. Tag your friends. Tag all your friends, people, because this is important. It's important for however you identify to understand. And by the way, men have cycles too. It generally happens. So a woman's cycle, moon phase, so going from the new moon to the full moon, happens in about 28 to 35 days. For men, it generally happens over the course of like 24 to 48 hours. So men will go through waves and rhythms hormonally. It's just much faster. It's much more masculine. The feminine energy likes to take its time because in the feminine energy, time isn't like a real thing. So ovulation. Now, if the egg isn't fertilized, then we start to move into the luteal phase, which now the egg is starting to pass through the uterus, goes into the cervix, goes into the vaginal canal. And if it hasn't been fertilized, this is where there's kind of that fall energy. So the energy of summer starts to go a little bit more inward. And this is where you may notice you're not totally inward, but you're kind of like retracting your energy a little bit. And just like the fall, the leaves start to die, things start to slow down. And this can be, I have found this phase for myself can be even more challenging than menses because your body's in that kind of purgatory state. So you're not fully in the depths of winter and know like I'm bleeding, I'm totally inward, I'm nourishing myself, but it's that transitory state. So when the moon is full, it starts to go back and not be as shiny, but there's still fragments of it there. So this could look like maybe more gentle movement, not maybe as gentle, but less intensity. You're a little bit more into that planning mode, but not necessarily planning for something to go out, but more like introspectively going in for your own life. So going a little bit more internal. And that's the luteal phase as the hormones start to come down. And then we go into menses and then it happens all over again. Again, this is for a normal rhythm and a normal cycle. And I share this too because oftentimes people will ask me, well, I don't have a uterus, or I'm on birth control, like I don't necessarily have a cycle. And what I share with them is like, you don't bleed, but you still have an energetic rhythm and you still have a cycle. because your menstrual cycle is more than just your vagina, it's more than just your uterus, it's more than just your ovaries. It's a whole energetic, full embodied experience that involves multiple different parts of your being. And people have to remember your hormones and the hormones in your cycle also influence other hormones that don't necessarily relate directly to menstruation, for example, or fertility. It's all interconnected. So, for example, your thyroid deals with metabolism and energy, and some of those hormones also interact with things like FSH and progesterone and estrogen and LH and all these different hormones that we'll talk about more in detail, the science part of it, at our June workshop. So it's all connected. Your sleep might be different. That's melatonin, right? So there's all these different neurochemical things happening that your cycle is more than just bleeding. It's really who you are. And the more you can honor it and actually schedule your life as much as you can. Like if you know you have a big project, for example, if you're an entrepreneur and a business owner and you know that maybe you like doing podcasts or you like talking or you work with other people at your job and you have a little bit more autonomy, and when you schedule things, it's really wise and will serve your energy to maybe know and track, when am I ovulating? Okay, maybe I have the capacity to schedule more that week, versus if you know when you're menstruating, don't overbook yourself. Maybe you go more inward, or you do more journaling, or you have more one-on-one stuff, right? Rather than like being with a ton of people and not understanding why. Maybe you have more anxiety or you're just exhausted because your body literally is at a different energetic state. So this is something that I recommend to my clients. Is I personally use the Flow app, FLO. It's like a pink little feather. And I've been tracking my cycles now for quite a few years. And it's really powerful to look at that app and say, oh, I'm ovulating in 5 days. That makes sense why I feel my energy ramping up. I'm able to push more at the gym. So even today, I noticed I was able to lift a lot more weight. And that's something that, my brother does my workout programs. That's something I've noticed when it comes to my workouts is if I'm at the gym and I have to drop weight in like squatting or even like simple things like a shoulder press, I'm like, oh, rather than being hard on myself, I'm like, oh, I'm menstruating. Like I don't have the level of energy that I normally do, or rather I just have a different level of energy. I don't want to say that I normally, because part of like being in rhythm with your cycles is there's no like right or wrong part of your cycle. My energy is just different. So then I might do lower weights. I might do more yoga. I might need to sleep more. I'm not as like strategic in like doing lives like this. And so rather than judging yourself for not being on all the time, you can actually start to hone in on the power of, oh, I'm ovulating. I'm gonna leverage this, which is really cool. And it becomes like magic, which is awesome. That's why we're calling it Magic of Your Moon. Gerard, your judging myself voice is hilarious. Thank you. Yes, men go through moon cycles. Men go through cycles. So maybe I'll get Michael to come on here and talk about that. Or maybe I'll do a workshop on that. So men obviously don't have the same hormones as women. They have testosterone, and testosterone fluctuates more throughout the day. And women have testosterone as well. But I shouldn't say that. Men do have estrogen, it's just lower. And women, by the way, you do want to have high or balanced levels of testosterone. It's not going to be as high as men, but you do want to have normal levels of testosterone because that is your sex drive. So we'll be talking about this because it gets pretty sciencey, it gets pretty heady, and I'll be drawing out actually at what point in your cycle where the hormones are at and drawing pretty graphs because I like to get nerdy about that, and you can actually see these rhythms again. And a lot of that does come back to what is your lifestyle like? So are you someone who moves your body? Are you someone who chooses higher vibrational food? Are you someone whose nervous system is regulated? And if there are certain lifestyle factors that are not supporting or are supporting your ability to navigate stress, that will definitely impact your cycles. Something I see is like women who are super, super stressed all the time, they don't even have a cycle because their body doesn't even have the capacity to allow that to happen. What I mean by that is they don't have a menses. And it's really important too to allow the eggs to move through, because remember, every single one of those eggs in your body, you're born with the amount of eggs that you have in your lifetime, and you don't create more. So what you're born with at birth, it gets cut in half. So you're generally born with about 500,000 eggs. And then when you actually initiate menses for the first time, it gets cut in half again. Maybe not half, but it gets cut. And then those are the amount of eggs you have, and you either fertilize them or you don't. And obviously I'm not going to get into the whole thing about that, but the science behind that is every single egg has a consciousness, and every single egg has been impacted by what your mom went through as well as your grandmother. So if your grandmother, let's say, grew up in a really, Great Depression, really hard time, dealt with a lot of stress, and then that got passed on to your mom and that got passed on to you through DNA, you may have some trauma and stuff in there that through a menstrual cycle and through a menses phase, you can clear generational trauma if you're allowing yourself to bleed. And that's why personally, I'm not necessarily a fan of stopping the bleed. Sorry, I laughed in my head about that because one of our friends has a joke about stopping the bleed. Anyway, I think bleeding and allowing yourself to flow is super vital to clearing generational trauma and clearing your own energy. And it can be such a powerful reset when you actually hone into it. So I digress. Men have a cycle. It's just different. And it happens at a much faster rhythm. So men, you can tune into this as well. Just noticing your energy throughout the day. Generally, testosterone is highest around 10 o'clock, for women at least. For men, it's generally highest in the morning. So that's why working out in the morning for men can be really powerful to utilize that testosterone. Women, it takes a little bit more time. So your testosterone is going to be higher a little bit later in the morning. So you may not be like, I'm not a morning person to work out. This is something I was battling with for a long, long time. I was like, the 5:30 a.m. thing just doesn't work for me. I don't know why. I was comparing myself to men. And then I learned this. I was like, oh, that's why I really feel my energy really kick in between 8 and 11 a.m. And that's why I actually shifted my office hours. So I can move my body and utilize that and then come into my office and serve people with a different energy rather than starting really early, not getting my workout in because I didn't feel like it at 5:30. And this was even after certain amount of sleep. I just wasn't on, And that's a testosterone is the drive, the onness, the motivation, just what testosterone is designed to do. So I just read the comments here. So with that, I hope this serves. No matter how you identify, you have different phases, you have different cycles, you have different rhythms. Each one really does serve. And it doesn't matter if you don't have the anatomy. My language is I'm ending my week. Even if you don't have the anatomy, you still have cycles, you still have rhythms because it's not just an anatomical experience, it's an energetic experience. And the more you can hone in on these, the more you're going to be able to create a life that honors rest and also honors work. I am up to right now reshifting and deprogramming myself from the work culture because that can be really damaging to our physiology, to our mindset, especially if you identify as a woman and you have a menses. This just doesn't make sense. And then you go into guilt and you go into shame and it just doesn't make sense. Okay? So that's what I'm up to. And if you're curious about learning more and going deeper into the actual strategies, the actual consciousness, things that you can do and apply in your own life at different times of your cycle, I'm going to drop the link to our Magic of the Moon workshop. Right now it is designed for those who do have a menses. And in the future, we will create different communities and cultures where I think it would be powerful for people who identify as men to join too. Because as I'm seeing Gerard on here, I hope this is powerful for you, my friend, that you can understand that and really connect and resonate. So I'll drop it in the comments here. If you're tuning in live or you are tuning in later, check it out. You can check out the details. You can register. We are going to be increasing prices come June. So get on it. I say that because I'm ovulating, so that's my energy. I hope this was valuable, whether you're tuning in live or you're tuning in later. I will reshare this video. I will repurpose it because I think there's some nuggets in here that you can already apply in your life. And if you want to go deeper with us and be in a powerful space of community and really share intimately what your experience has been, it's not just going to be like seminar education, it's going to be an embodiment and really an experience with breath work, with yoga, with movement, and supporting you. Because part of healing your cycle too is connecting with other people, because we are communal beings. So I will wrap it up with that. Drop a comment below if you have any questions on what I'm talking about, because I'd love to answer those. And make sure you check out the link. I'm wishing you all a happy Friday and a happy weekend. Cheers.